First, start with a perfect circle to the best of your abilities, and you can fix it as you go. To get a perfect circle, just keep rotating your arm, drawing from my shoulder and not from my wrist. That's another thing. Hopefully you're holding your pencil like this and not like that, right? So this is going to give you much more control. You can go ahead and erase whatever you don't need. We'll make it better as we go. Okay, and then where is a Terminator line? Where does the light end? You can just look at it as one straight line and see the ratio. If this is the start and that's the end, where approximately, how does it divide it? And it's just one long tilt, like one long line. And it seems like it's got a lot of tilts, but actually it's just one more tilt over here to create this triangle. And let's figure out where exactly the Terminator line has to pass through on the other side. It passes through here, so it's going to be slightly like this. And then on the other side, it's going to pass through there. So it has to be like this. Since we actually have a reference of a sphere, do try and draw it accurately. You know, you can take the tilt and make sure that this is moving at the right tilt. Do the best that you can. The darkest part of the sphere is going to be the cast shadows. The Terminator line is the line where the light officially terminates, because this is the light side. This is where the light is bouncing. It's coming from the top. This is still receiving light. I mean, you could say that this is where the light starts to terminate, but do you see how this is still part of the light values? Do you see how like the shadow side of our value range begins way down here? This is telling you how to interpret that. So when you have a sphere, you need to be able to squint your eyes and say, where approximately is the Terminator line? Nope, this is still light. There it is. That's where light officially terminates. This is, of course, simplifying all of that and turning into one plane. But basically, this is still turning a corner. Do you see how it goes right to shadow, right down there? There's the line that it officially terminates. And this is a form shadow, and this is cast shadow. So you could draw this as one shape, and that would be your shadow shape. And when you squint, there's barely any difference between all this. It's just a tiny bit of light that you could pull out with an eraser. So you would render this all pretty flat, and then you would pull out a little bit of light here. But from the moment you go from here up, you already need to start increasing the voltage. But look at how much room you need to make for all of that value, because this is changing. That's a different value strip. That's a different value strip. So you have to be able to think in these strips of value. And there are about 9 values between black and white. So train your hand. And that is why we start, when we're using graphite, you start to increase the number of H pencils that you're using. If we cannot render a sphere, we cannot possibly render a head accurately. So you need to be able to render a sphere first. So this is just an oval in space. And then you're going to connect it, and it has to be no lower than this. How does it pass through the ball? It has to pass through like that high. There has to be a nice overlap. And it's just a circle in perspective is an oval. So now that I have my Terminator line and this, I'm going to start filling in. The way I'm applying paint in the shadow is all of my lines are very, very close together. So I'm using very, very equal pressure. I'm applying it very close together. Here's zoomed in what I'm doing with my pencil. So rather than doing this where I don't lift my pencil at all, I'm placing one mark right next to the previous one. I pick it up and I place another mark. And I'm picking one direction for my lines. And I'm placing it right next to each other. Do you see how I'm controlling my pressure? It's this equal pressure all the way across. That's how you get consistent, even value. This is just practice. You should, for homework, fill in boxes where you actually have equal pressure with your hand. What often happens when we shade is we like do random pressure here, and then we suddenly do this, and then you have different pressure, and it doesn't look like a consistent plane. It looks like a giant mess. It has to be quiet. So that's practice. So here I'm just gonna pick, I'm picking like a diagonal stroke. And I'm filling it all in, all the way across. This method, we're not going to be using a blending stump for. So you really are forced to be very careful with your pressure. Just do the best that you can, and then already it should be better results, even if you don't do this perfectly. But you see, it should be nice and clean. And I'm going to do the same thing for my big shadow shape that I've drawn out using my Terminator line. Long strokes. I'm just going to do it sort of like a rounded curve straight across. And the duller your pencil is, the grainier your mark will be. This is when sharpening your pencils matters. So do you see how I'm using one long stroke all the way across? And this is me applying equal consistent pressure with an HB, which is not me forcing it to be any darker. It's whatever is its natural value. When I'm holding it very, very lightly, I'm not making a darker mark. I could apply more pressure and I would get a naturally darker mark. But here's how you achieve really nice shading. Rather than pressing harder when you want it to go darker, you're simply going to add another sheet of value. So you're going to take the same pencil with the same amount of pressure and just apply the same, like one more time over the whole thing. And you're going to get into all those little white spots, and you're just doing exactly the same thing over it again. And that is how I'm going to make it one shade darker. So in order to get anything darker in your paintings, rather than pressing harder or picking up a darker pencil, you simply, apply another sheet of value with graphite. That's how you want to do it with graphite. And this is going to be very useful later when we are removing little flecks of problems with our eraser, because you'll basically be lifting a layer of value off, but you'll still have what was underneath. You see how subtle it is, the transition from that side to this side. This is one layer, this is two layers, same pressure. Now notice all you need to do on this whole shadow side is make it flat and dark. And the darker you make this shadow side, the easier it's going to be to render more volume, more form over here. You won't have to work so hard if you make it dark enough. So make it dark enough, make it like consistent. Since we're working so smoothly, use a brush to wipe off any eraser marks. Oh, by the way, if you really want to smooth this out and you want to do it quickly, you can use a brush instead of a stump. So I'm taking a thick brush, I'm going to start flattening my cast shadow. So let's see what happens. Do you see, because I applied the paint so close together, it's giving me a nice smooth, here, it's going to be much easier here because I have a lot of graphite here. So I'm going to start creating a very smooth, see how I'm brushing? It's smoothing it out. This is only going to work if you did a really smooth job. And I'm going across the form. Whereas I was applying my paint that way, I'm now blending it, you know,
the other way.
Right? So there we go. I've blended it all together, but this is way cleaner blending than a, you know, than what a stump would do. So if you really do want to do it more quickly, you could do like a few sheets of graphite and then blend with the brush. And that's pretty good. And that's all I need. I need to get this to be flat. And definitely apply your initial strokes lightly with a pencil, because all that dark contour stuff, there's not going to be any contour on anything. It's just going to be values coming together. What's nice about pencil, as opposed to like graphite, pastel, charcoal, is that I'm not like erasing paint when I go in with a brush necessarily as much as I do with, you know, sometimes with paint, you're like, oh, what's the perfect amount of paint to apply so it's coming on and not like that my brush isn't wiping it off. You know, it's a little bit more stable. So our darkest dark is going to be the cast shadow on the table. And then the next darkest value after that is going to be the bottom of the sphere here, where the table meets the shadow side of this ball. This is going to be pretty dark. And then the next darkest dark is going to be right here. It's a very, very thin strip, tiny thin strip. So these are your darkest darks. And you see how cool that graphic shape is? It's going to be very cool. It's a way to make more interest. The next darkest value after that is going to be over here. You have like another group set of values. You can break it into as many values as you want, but it's getting darker and darker as it wraps around. If we analyze it, light source is up here. It's hitting this object. Anything over here is going to be the lightest light. The next lightest light is a table that's washed with light. The darkest dark is a cast shadow on this. So anything past this point, since these planes are slowly turning out of the light, slowly turning out, this is the moment where it's officially out of the light. But because this table is so white, it's such a white table and so shiny and such a powerful light source, it's bouncing into the shadow shape and increasing the voltage here. So you basically end up with a middle value that you see. Let's see, where do we see it? We see it like, it's like this whole thing looks like it's one value. But you have to maintain a strong terminator line, which is here, right there, you know, passing through. The terminator line itself is getting lighter and lighter as you go. So if you suddenly make all of this too dark, or if any of you have too much darkness over here, you're missing out on the nice reflective light that can bounce in. So what we're going to do is, instead of, you're not going to remove anything, of course, you're good. Right now, whatever you have is the value that this is going to be. The value that we have in our shadows right now is going to be the lightest value in the shadows. Now we're going to continue adding darker darks into the darkest parts of the shadow. So I'm taking my darker pencil and I'm going to start bringing in my darkest darks. I'm going to go into my terminator line. I'm going to start here at the terminator line and start bringing in my darker strip over here into that terminator and integrate it nicely into the rest of this. And it has to be darkest here. And I need to make sure I'm also working within my drawing, that I don't lose the drawing of the terminator line. And by pushing this a little bit darker, it gives you more room. Yeah. So have a plan of how this wraps across. Before you just start shading, have a plan of exactly where this is going to be going and feel your way across and understand and see what this is part of. What I'm doing right now is I'm creating this shape. I'm making this shape that's darker. I need to make it darker. The reason why my directions are sort of changing is because I already have all this stuff filled in, but now I'm sort of like, I need to create what looks to be a continuous, like a natural, like darkness here that's integrated into the rest of this. But I sort of have to work into all those little light spots because some of it is already the correct value. Some of it is, you know, it's almost like it's very surgical. Looking at where exactly I need to fill it in to make it smooth. And so as you go deeper and deeper into your shading process, you do have to start sneaking in value into the little crevices where it's not in there, because you know it's not like a perfectly smooth sheet. But I'm slowly increasing, and it's going to be darkest over there. Take your kneaded eraser, turn it into a point, a really tight point. And if you have something that's the wrong value, like on mine, where is it? I have to remove, I don't know, let's say I want to remove something here. So I can remove this, right? That's a little too dark here, down here. So the way you do it is you just tap the spot with a point, tiny little tap, and you remove it. And you keep tapping it, tap it out, and you just tap it out. So, you know, if I want to remove this, and the reason why it works so well with the technique we're using is we're working in sheets of graphite. So I want to get rid of this edge. And so I want to lift off only the last layer of graphite I placed and keep the first layer. You're not erasing down to the white of the paper. It's also why you shade in layers. The more layers of value that you stack on top of each other, the better it is. So I'm just removing this edge all the way across, and it's like all in my control. I still have all these little white spots that need, but my pencil is way too dull right now. If you've ever seen me sharpen pencils like in class with the, you know, really to a fine point, that is what this is for. What I'm doing rather than doing this is I'm moving my whole arm, keeping it straight. You've got to get this to be dark enough, darker than the light side. I'm doing that right now as well. I'm integrating a little bit more with just my regular HB pencil. And this is after I even use my paintbrush. You could use your paintbrush to sort of blend it a little. Don't be too aggressive with it. It all comes down to how closely you're placing your strokes next to each other. The objective that you're after is getting this to look consistent and to be the right value overall and for it to be smooth. This is for all those little tiny, tiny spots. I want to thread it all together. Anytime you have these little white spots that are not filled in. This isn't finished until it looks good. So I'm going to go back and forth in my process until I'm happy with it, with this turn. But it takes a while to get this to be a nice, smooth transition. You'll see if anything is off, if anything is disrupting the flow of value, I have to go patch it up and fix it. So I need to have pace myself, give myself a little bit more dark here so that it's easier to create light over there. because this all still has to be lighter. I mean, this has to have value, but all of this needs to be lighter than all of that. I'm not giving myself much room to grow from here to here. This is going to be way too light. So I'm okay with pushing all of my darks a little bit darker. And I'm resting my wrist on my page so that I have this good support, so that it's, you know, I'm really controlling my touch, and I'm holding it at the end. I'm not holding it up here. You really have to hold it here like a fulcrum, and then let it just touch and have a really, really light touch. I'm really not drawing any darker than this anywhere. Are you noticing the difference in using a sharp pencil? I mean, when you sharpen your pencils really sharp, it's going to be so nice to use. You just get into all those little crevices. I'm going to push my entire cast shadow down, and you're building a hierarchy. Well, right now this is already like my third layer of graphite in the cast shadow. So you might have, you can build up to like, I don't know, 6, 10, it's infinite. You can have so many layers of graphite, and the more layers you have, the way more interesting it will be. More depth, that's it. And it's much easier to edit a painting with more layers, because again, you have more layers that you can remove and work into. But yeah, more depth. And the second your pencils get dull, you'll notice you're getting that scratchy, interrupted, broken, you know, patchy line. That's when you have to start sharpening. You can take a really small brush, maybe like a small round, and go in little spots like this. So I'm going to just compress my cast shadow. And that's as much cheating as I'm willing to do. I mean, cheating is where you blend with a stump or something without just controlling your values. I view this as cheating, but it's okay because it's a brush, and I am applying my paint really close together, so I'm doing a lot of the work. And the only reason why I'm using the brush here is because I don't have my pencils sharpened to the degree I want, and I want you to be able to have this tool that can help you speed it up. This was like an early an early drawing where I was trying to figure out how to work like this. But what you do is you flatten all of your shadows first, and your cast shadow, I mean your Terminator line is here. There's your Terminator, and it would be in here. It's in there. But the hardest part is like turning out of the shadow. But then, and then same thing here. So the Terminator line would be here, like under there. And then you already have to start going. And then here it's like, well, where's my Terminator line? It's over here. This cast shadow is much easier because it's just casting. Anything that's casting a shadow on the next form is easier. But when you have form shadow, now look, up close, here's a pencil line. Up close, do you see any shading in here? There's barely anything in the light planes, but as you zoom out, you'll see that I actually have form turning in there. The only area where I don't have form where I don't have value painted over. I just didn't finish this drawing. This is all just still the white of the page. And I just sort of like stopped. But do you see how many layers of graphite you go? And this is very sloppy handling of a shadow. Like it's still pretty grainy, but basically it's consistent. And then up here is where the real work is. Like how light do your pencils need to be? Like a 9H, 6H. But as you zoom out, you're like, you were actually rendering form, you know, and this little overexposed with light.
How long did that take you to do that?
Do you see what I mean? Like when you expand it, you actually notice, right, where you don't have so much light bouncing off.
Right.
That's a lot of work. So the only areas where there's actually white are these little corners. It took me about a month, like many hours, many hours. So this
yeah,
is
you're barely touching
barely touching. But how do you do it with an HB? It is not possible to make an HB draw this light. It's just not possible. So
you're working with a 6H or something?
Yeah, 6H. I would find like as many high H's as I could. I was obsessed with the H's. But what you need to maintain, this entire section has to be lighter than anything over here. And this is slowly getting lighter and lighter because this basically the top plane of your thing. This is all top plane. So think of it that way. And then it's starting to turn down of like your box. This is starting to turn down. So this is turning down. This is top plane, top plane. But then within this top plane, how do you turn just a white plane into more? You have to be traveling on the form and thinking about where, if you were crawling on the surface. So again, I just want you to see that this could be taken far, but you don't have to go this far. But it's really useful to be able to at least render a sphere, right? Because, you know, and be able to like pace yourself. So that's what I'm like thinking about here. That's why I'm getting into all these little cracks. And the better job you do on your shadows, the better it's going to be in your light. Stuff like what I just did with where I added here to make this darker. And then I'm going to be thinking about this, right? Darker. I can see that this can be planned into one value. This is another value. And then this. So you're right. You can make as many, you can see it like that, right? You can see this because this is all basically wrapping around getting lighter. So it's basically this is kind of more like one value, and then it's getting like darker and dark. And you can open it up into how many values you see, but squint. And basically, this all has to be flat and within a small range of value. So all of these little zones, this is the space that they need to occupy. But yeah, so this takes a while. Keep working on it slowly. Until your shadows are flat and like keyed correctly, you cannot start moving into the lights. That's a big problem that happens with painting. Like when we're painting portraits, you will start rendering like middle values and then go back into your darks and then do like all sorts of back and forth between highlights, and it feels like you're chasing values. It's much easier to start by flattening your shadows in your paintings, getting them the right value, and crawling out of the shadows into your middle, into your halftones, and then work your way into the lights. You need to get this all to be quiet. You have too much texture and noise with all of your lines. So a good way to just, a little cheat right now, is carefully with the brush. Be very careful with it. Don't just go over everything. Be very, very careful with what you're blending. You know, very delicate. And you're also, you know, barely, don't stop until you feel that you've gotten a nice smooth surface with the brush. And because you have all this paint that you applied so close together, it should make it a much easier time of blending with the brush. Anything that doesn't belong, you lift out with your kneaded eraser. So 3 exercises you need to do. You should draw out a bunch of boxes on your page and practice filling them in. And each box should have a different direction for a line. Diagonal, vertical, horizontal, and just apply your brush strokes like rain, super close together, and one consistent value. And really train your hand to make that like second nature so that you never have, so that it's just so, it just makes all of your work so much cleaner. It's just more articulate that way. Everything's going to be better when you do that. Just get good at this. Find what is your preferred direction for brush strokes. What do you not like? Which angles are weird for you? And do that. The cube is going to be much easier. See that the planes are, this whole thing is basically one plane, right? One value. So the brush stroke I would use on the cube would be this way. So this gives you practice with everything, going with the surface that way. And then you can do this way, or you can just do like vertical for everything here. This could be vertical, that could be vertical, this could go like that, and then this one can be horizontal. And remember, these are going to be long strokes. Try not to do little bits here and then here and then here. Try to do a long stroke that fills in the entire page. That's what you're practicing.
Okay.
You want to do a very, very light drawing because this doesn't want to be visible by the end. You're going to have background coming in contact with the object. Definitely draw them small because you don't want to spend forever on it. You don't want to have to be covering up a giant amount of paper. This has to hit a background and you don't want to have an edge anymore. So you're going to have to, you know, create some tone. I'm going to do it as quickly as I can. But you can only lay down tones so fast, right? But you see how I'm laying it down? One stroke at a time, super close together. And you can even let it go past that contour edge because you can erase that. That little, anything that's like a little bit too darkly drawn, like too much pressure is gonna, you know, show up and it's gonna disrupt the flow. You just want this to be one even wall.
Okay.
So, and what I'm doing is I'm not doing zigzag. I'm doing one stroke at a time, placed right next to each other. So I keep lifting my pencil for this. I hope that's what you were all doing as well. I know it's like the thing that's most annoying about that if you're impatient is that it takes a long time. It's like, come on, man, I don't have this time.
Yeah.
But do it to the best of your abilities. And even getting you to do any of this, you're already like, look at what you did, you know, and you don't need to master this. I mean, take it as far as you possibly can, as far as your temperament will allow, and don't worry about the rest. I'll push you as hard as I can, but you know, you're already doing so well. I'm just not letting you know. I just want to push you extra hard. Okay, and then with the pencil, you could use a stump, but my problem with the stump is that it's not even. Like if you blend with a stump, it's very difficult to control, like it's way too violent and aggressive. But a brush, and because you laid, especially if you lay down one more sheet of value, now that I'm going to go over it again, and I didn't do a perfectly even job here, I am kind of trying to just like go over the cracks, but also just lay down one extra tone. So the reason why I just did another layer is because I want to go over it with a brush right now. Do the best that you can. That was good enough. 2 layers of pretty close strokes. And then do the rest of it with a brush. And look at, and I'm just swirling it. I'm like pressing it into the grooves of the page. And all you need for the background is for it to be darker than the object. The most important part here is this, where it meets the ball. You don't want to have any texture there. It just has to be perfectly smooth. And then I'm going to pull out all the little mistakes with the eraser. And I sort of start from the inside and pull my way out. But even that is it's sort of like going back in space. You can keep like a light edge, but yeah, I do want to like fix the drawing. So fine, whatever. I'll just use this because it's like a pencil to fix the drawing. But yeah, but then I can go back and soften the edge of this ball, because if you do have such a hard edge, it looks flat. You do want to have, and soft edges again is like gradients. So you can go back, fix it, and it should pop forward. I'm getting rid of every little part of the like outline. There should be nothing. And then, you know, don't use your fingers or your hands even.
It's hard not to, but yeah.
Whatever, you know, like don't do that. But then the next thing for this sphere, you know, you got to go back and of course bring in more value until this clicks. Until it clicks, and maybe you could do a little bit of an edge, but it doesn't want to, you know, you don't want it to look flat, and also have your drawing be perfect, of course. But that's like, this is such an important thing, like how two values come together, how they meet. And then of course I didn't do any of this. This is the most important part. I didn't get up to that last week. How do you travel out of the Terminator line? This is the most important area on a form. So what I'm doing is I'm bringing it super close to the edge. You know, very, very, very close. You really have to create your greatest range, like number of values are in this block. Like you go from dark to middle value to middle value, right? To light. And by the time you're like here, you're already pretty much in the lights and you don't have much work to do. But this is where the most amount of work is. And until you create a soft edge, this is not going to look like it's turning. It's going to look like two flat shapes stuck onto each other. So I'm using a 4H to crawl out. It just happens to be a 4H. I don't, you know, it doesn't have to be a 4H. In fact, I'm going to bring the 4H a little bit, you know, out more, because I do need to bring this into the light. And then you'll see, oh, my background should be even darker, right? I'm just laying down some very, very light tone in the whole thing, because this is obviously too light. I'm trying to do this as quickly as possible so that it doesn't, you know, you don't get tortured. But you would do this like way more carefully, right? But you see how closely I'm keeping it together, and I have to maintain that it's going from dark into light. And the areas that'll be soft edges or a lost edge on a form is where the value of the form is the same value as a background. And so you just can't see an edge there. You have to be okay with that. But it's cool when that happens. Like maybe my background should actually be this value. You know, I shouldn't be using a 4H for this background. I should use like an HB, because it's nice to have a really dark background and get into all those little, so there's always this little glow. I don't know. Sometimes a glow is good because a white ball does bounce light around it. Like it does reflect light. A white surface reflects light. At some point, the background will be the same value. This is a 2H. It'll just be the same value as the object in some spot on the object. Any area where you have lost edges, that creates immediately a sense of mystery, because you're like, I can't make out what's over there. And you're forced to connect the dots and say, wait, but based on what's around it, I see the start of the form and I see the end of the form, but I don't really see the middle somewhere. And there's this gap in what you're able to see. if you're in an advanced class, like if you're in a portrait class, you should already know this is the point. Like that's why we do need to go back to this, because you're never going to get you see, like that's turning into a lost edge.
Right.
And turn into a lost edge, and that's cool because suddenly the ball emerges in two areas. The ball emerges where it suddenly gets really dark and comes out of the background, like whoa, that's close to me. And then it's going to suddenly emerge where it's really light, and this side has more magic than this. See how flat that is? That is just two shapes together. And how do you turn a flat shape into a volume? You've got to give it gradient. You've got to give it form. And I instinctively know, like, how am I going back in here? What am I choosing to shade next? What I'm looking to do is to have a consistently turning form, meaning values going from dark into light. And where I'm going back in is where I don't see a good flow, where I see like, this is lighter than that. I've got to bring that closer. It has to move from dark to light. You got to see like, what are you able to pick up? Maybe it's like barely perceptible. There's even a difference. My eye's picking it up, and so I'm going back in there. So just make sure that you go perfectly flawless. And it's amazing what a difference it makes. Wow. Just patching up the seams, just the tiny little seams. And so you might start to perceive that there's no edge between Terminator Line, right? That you're almost losing the Terminator Line, but you're not. And that is what's really important. You have to go as close as you can in value to the Terminator Line, but still maintain a difference. Still make this always one value darker. Don't lose that. And then you can keep going. You can go and refine it, make your Terminator Line a little bit darker, and it blends out to just soft. I'm resting my hand here. If that's a surface, I'm just letting it touch. I'm not actually down here like going right with my finger. I'm here and just letting it drop, barely moving it, rather than physically forcing it to draw. You're just letting it move, barely even holding it. And this way, the rotation of it's coming from my wrist rather than my fingers. It's coming from here, just moving. So keep it, that's actually more control than more force. Keep looking at the difference between this and this. It really makes a big difference, just getting into all those little cracks. And then I'm just going into all the little white spots that I still see. And then of course, this whole thing is it's good to sort of tone the entire thing. This is just a 6H. So I'm sort of just toning everything, and then I will pull out the lights. Do you see like the difference in what I'm doing, or is it like not even perceptible?
No, of course you see it.
No, I see it.
But I'm barely touching it, right? And this is a 6H, and it's amazing that a 6H can still do something. But again, it looks like I'm not applying any, I'm not applying any pressure. And the most important thing is there, where you go and patch it up. It's got to really go from dark into light. Most of this is a 2H. I don't need a 6B is what I'm saying. Like, I don't need a really dark pencil. I just need to make sure that this is darker than that, and that's darker than this, and that this is the darkest of all the things. And the second I apply more pressure, it's over. You're gonna always see that. So when you get a weird thing like that, where you applied a little bit too much, you just lift it out with the eraser. Right, lift out the individual things. You can feel free to use a brush. See, I'm gonna just soften all the little, but the brush is not gonna help you. I think what some people do is like, it's like, oh yeah, I can just jump right to the brush and it's gonna soften everything. No, you actually have to do all this work where you lay down all this tone, and then there's graphite right next to each other, all these strokes, that there's something to blend. But you can never blend when there's like, your strokes are too far apart, right? And then the most fun part is when you start to erase like the highlights, you know, you pull it out after with all that tone. It's just like, it's just so fun when you get to do that. I'm doing it way too aggressively, but you know, then you can just soften the edge there. Some of this you can just do with pure brush. Like after your brush has loaded up enough graphite on itself, you can just paint the rest of the lights with just whatever graphite is on the brush, you know.